Assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to start with a new topic, and our today's topic is narratology. See, narratology is not something that is new to you, I believe, because this is something you've already discussed plenty of times, numerous times. Every time you talk about some story, some fiction, some novel, some play, or even poetry for that matter, we keep talking about the narrative voice, the narrative structure, how the narrative is framed, right? So we are already used to looking at the literary text from a narrative perspective, from the perspective of narratology. So another thing that I would like your notice on is like for you to notice is that narratology is very close to structuralism. Okay, you could call structuralism a sort of predecessor to narratology, all right, because it sort of gave birth to narratology. See, remember how we analyzed pose, the oval portrait, the narrative structure of oval portrait, how there is a framing narrative and the embedded narrative, and how it is we compared each one to the other. Remember? So this is what we are going to do here, but we are going to be a little more specific. We are going to go a little more deeper into the realms of it, and we are going to look at it from various perspectives, from different people's perspectives, different critics' perspectives. So we are going to look at it from Aristotelian perspective, Genetian perspective, and Propian perspective. Okay, so we are going to look into Aristotelian narratology, Genetian narratology, and Propian narratology. Okay, so I mean there are plenty of other different modes and methods of looking at the narrative structures of literary texts, but these are the three prime concerns that Barry seems to focus upon, and hence we do too. All right, so I happened to come across some couple of slides from the internet, but I thought it would be it would come off as stealing from someone else, so I rather refrained from doing so. So I'm just going to focus upon the book until my laptop comes back to me. I'm going to just use the book itself. I hope this is clear enough. I hope the fonts are clear enough for you, big enough for you to see. All right, so narratology is basically the study of narrative structures, as I've already discussed. It's basically narrative structures. All right, narratology is a branch of structuralism, but has achieved certain independence from its parent, and hence it's been given a new chapter, a separate chapter of its own. So before Barry goes on into talking about narratology, he speaks of one story himself, because see, narratology deals with stories, right? So he wants to start with a story of his own. This is rather fun, so I didn't want to miss it. Look at this. A few years ago, I was in a restaurant called Barry's. Okay, so Peter Barry seems to have gone to a restaurant which was called Berries, a very fanciful name, and of course it reminds you of all sorts of juicy, fruity, succulent place where you get some really fresh food, right? So the menu featured those highly colored, almost poetic descriptions of the meals on offer. It didn't offer cod and chips, for instance, but fresh caught, succulent, not sea cod, coated in a layer of light golden batter and served with a generous portion of delicious French fries. See, cod and chips is something that cod and chips. Where is it? Yeah, cod and chips is something that people are really familiar with, because all it has is some fish and some potato chips. Okay, or potato or any kind of chips. All right. So this is something that you would find just about anywhere. But this menu had something very fanciful narrative to describe its food, the very same cod and chips. Okay, please ignore the background noise. It's just a small baby sitting beside me, and I can't really help it. Okay. Fresh cod, succulent North Sea cod. North Sea cod would be fish, coated in a layer of light golden batter and served with a generous portion of delicious French fries. All right, all right. I'm sorry. I hope it's not making. Yeah. So sea, it belongs to North Sea. Obviously, you're actually told where it came from. All right, and you're told the exact color it is bound to be. Obviously, no chef is bound to is bound to get the exact shade of light golden brown. Okay, light golden batter. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry for the interruption. Well, so the menu is highly colorful in terms of, instead of merely saying chicken cots, it seems to go along with the location, with its geographical location, with the texture, the flavor, the color. It seems to focus upon just about everything. It seems to tell you a story about cod and chips rather than merely offering a plain and simple cod and chips. Okay, so he says in the catering trade, these descriptions are called narratives, as in stories. Okay, an interesting fact in itself. But they worry in the trade that customers may take them literally and hence complain that the batter isn't golden at all, but sort of brownish. Right? I mean, people may argue about colors. Just think about it. Indigo. Have you ever seen indigo? I'm not talking about you know. The exact color. I mean, sorry. Okay. See, when you look at the rainbow, we've got Vibgyor, right? Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. But can you actually tell me exactly what color violet is and how you can differentiate it from other shades of blue and violet and purple and indigos, right? What is indigo? You may question that. So you see, there is a possibility that because of this narrative, narrative as in narrative in terms of catering trade, the customer might actually tell you that it's not exactly golden brown. It is sort of burnt brown, it's sort of light brown, or it's not exactly golden at all, just some brownish color. Perhaps leaving the restaurant vulnerable in charges of false description of goods or services. So at the bottom of the menu, there is a footnote which reads, the narratives are guidelines only and are not to be taken literally. See, very often you come across, when you look at the packet of noodles, Maggi, when you buy Maggi or Top Ramen, there is a very colorful picture of noodles, right, with all the vegetables in it, all the ingredients. It's so mouth-wateringly beautiful. You just want to gobble it up without even cooking. I mean, you want to cook it, but just saying, So it tells you a story. The picture tells you a story of how wonderful it can be, how spicy and tasty it can be, right? But then you also have this one small tiny detail at the bottom of the the pack that says, for representative purpose alone, something like that. Even in magazines you come across all those recipes, and at one corner there'll be a picture of some of the dish, and there will be one small line saying, for representative purpose, picture for representative purpose only, right? So that you wouldn't go and fight with them and saying that this is not what the recipe turned out to be, right? So narrative can be misleading, but that's beside the point. He says, this set me thinking about narratives and narrative theory, and about narratology, which we can define more closely as a study of how narratives make meaning and what the basic mechanisms are and procedures are which are common to all acts of storytelling. So you are made to think about what sort of mechanisms or procedures underlie or sort of are common to all acts of storytelling. So you look at certain common themes or common structures in terms of narrations. Okay, narratology then is not the reading and interpretation of individual stories, but the attempt to study the nature of story itself. So you are made to think about not merely individual stories. See, that's where I said we come in very close to structuralism. We are not talking about individual stories, okay, not individual stories. It mainly deals with the attempt to study the nature of story itself as a concept and as a cultural practice. Please make a note of it, okay. It's not merely the reading and interpretation of one single story. Of course, you can apply narratology once you understand the concepts and the, you know, the practice of narratology. You can apply it to a certain specific, you know, writing. For instance, if you're taking War and Peace, or maybe Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, you may apply narratives, or, you know, narratology to how there are sequence of narratives, or meta narratives inside the main narrative, the frame narrative. And you could look into the focalization, how the focus is on, from what the focus is from, and what the focus is on, who the narrator is, who the narratee is, and all of these things you can apply to a certain text, a literary text, an individual text later on. But narratology as a study basically deals with how the study seems to work in terms of its, the nature of story itself. No matter what story it is, it looks into the nature of story itself in terms of its concept and in terms of its cultural practice. Okay. Now, further, indeed, that distinction between the actual meal, cod and chips, and the narrative account of it, the succulent fresh caught cod, is much the same as the narratologist's basic distinction between story and plot. So it is almost very similar to how, as in, like, when you look at the cod and chips and the very colorful narrative of a freshly caught, not entirely whatever cod is. I mean, that's the difference you see in terms of story and plot. Okay, the story is the actual sequence of events as they happen, whereas the plot is those events as they are edited, ordered, packaged, and presented. See, this is the main difference. What is story? Story is the actual sequence of events as they happen, whereas plot is those events as they are edited, ordered, packaged, and presented, and in what we see or recognize as a narrative. This is a crucial distinction. Okay, the story, being the events as they happen, has to begin in the beginning, of course, and then move chronologically with nothing left out. The plot, on the other hand, may well begin somewhere in the middle of a chain of events and may then backtrack, providing us with a flashback which fills us in on things that happened earlier. The plot may also have elements which flash forward, hinting at events which will happen later. So the plot is a version of the story which should not be taken literally, just like those menu descriptions. So when the main distinction between the story and the plot is, like, when we speak of story, it's as if, like, the king died and the queen died, right? The king died, and then the queen died. This is a story that you are telling. Whereas the plot would actually tell you so many different things about it. It may begin from the middle and go front and back. It could move forwards and backwards, or it could tell you, it would actually give you the description of how, the sequence, the sequential order in which things happened, or it could one sec. So the main distinction between story and plot is fundamental to narratology, but the story of narratology itself is that there are many competing groups. As I said earlier, we are going to look into Aristotelian view and the Propian view and the Genetian view, all of it, of different groups of understanding, or different schools of understanding are there available for us to explore narrative schemes, narrative structures of texts. Okay, so they tend to prefer their own terminology. Therefore, you'll find that the same distinction made with different terms. So try not to get confused on the way. You just need to look at it from their lens. Okay. For instance, in his well-known essay Analysis and Interpretation of the Realist Text, David Lodge prefers the Russian formalist terms fabula instead of story and sujet. Okay, sujet for plot. So, see, yeah, there you are. Fabula for story, sujet for plot. Most current North American writing on narratology uses story, but instead of plot, the term discourse is often preferred. So, plot is also known as sujet and discourse as well. Please remember that. Plot is also known as sujet and discourse. Okay, so this I think is sensible because it isn't just plot in the narrow sense which is at issue, but style, viewpoint, pace, and so on. So when we are talking about plot, we're not merely talking about how how the story is structured or presented. Presentation would include everything. It would include style in which the writer has narrated it, or the viewpoint of the narrator, or the pace in which the narration proceeds, and everything, or the perspective. I mean, by viewpoint and perspective, all of these are sort of similar. The whole packaging of the narrative which creates the overall effect. Okay, so Gerard Genette uses yet another set of equivalent terms, these being his histoire. Okay, histoire or histoire, which has the same meaning as story or fabula, and récit, which means the same as plot or sujet. So there is another term for story, which would be histoire. Okay, and récit for plot. Okay, so for plot, okay, I'll just remove all of these scribbled writings so that we could just make the connections here. Story is also known as fabula. Okay, and it's also known as histoire. Now plot is also known as discourse. Okay, I'm just going from here to here. And also récit and sujet. Okay, sujet, plot, récit, discourse. All of it are different terms used by different critics or different schools of thought for plot. Story simply has probably two sets of terms. Okay, one is fabula, the other would be histoire. Whereas histoire, it's sort of lost in between all the scribbled lines. Okay, so simply put, for instance, when I said a story would simply indicate that a story about the events, what happened. Okay, the story simply presents what happened, whereas a plot would go through all the entanglements within it, as in how the king came to die, or who saw the king die, and what the narration is, what the perspective of the narration is. Okay, what kind of focalization is presented, from which viewpoint do you see the king dying, and who speaks of it, and what are the consequences of it, as in how is there a murder to it? Is it a murder, or is it a natural death? And if it's a murder, who killed him, and who sees the killing, and what are the repercussions, and how it seems to affect the queen, and why is the queen dying immediately after? Is there someone else, is the same murder killing her? I mean, see, the story tells you the history as in what happened. Now the plot is something that tells you how it happened, when it came to happen, who the teller is of the story. Okay, and what the setting of it is, or what style it is presented in. Does it have a very haunted, mysterious tone to it, or is it just a very melancholy setting in which it is presented, or is it something that is lamentable? All of these distinctions are focused upon in narratology. So moving on, I thought I'd begin with Aristotle today. Let me just see if we have enough time. Yeah, we can just have a brief introduction of Aristotle. So, a second story relevant to narratology is a story of narratology itself. A truncated history of narratology follows, centered on three main characters, the first of whom is Aristotle in his Poetics. So, we are going to talk about the story of narratology as in how it came into existence. Now, this is not something entirely new, because as I said earlier, of course, structuralism, so it's sort of a predecessor for narratology. Narratology seems to have been born of the idea of structuralism, right? But then it also had its basis, it also had its beginning centuries ago. So somewhere around 4th 5th century BC, Aristotle invented all these terms, devised all these terms to indicate certain aspects of plays. Okay, so speaking of especially tragedy, he seems to have invented so many terms that that would indicate certain, I'm sorry, I should simply just, so so we were talking about Aristotle, right? And there was some brief interruption. Okay, so Aristotle in his Poetics, we saw in chapter 1, Aristotle identifies character and action as the essential elements in a story. So we see that action is developed through character, right? So action comes through character, or rather how a character seems to go through his life, his brief span of life in a play or in a fiction, and that seems to bring in or like move the action forward. So we see that character and action as the essential elements of a story, and say that character must be revealed through action. Okay, so it is not merely what the character says that matters, it is what the character does. Okay, so a character here would indicate characterization. So characterization of each character would be revealed through how they seem to act. All right, which is to say through aspects of the plot. He identifies three key elements in a plot, these being, using Aristotle's Greek words, which are here simply anglicized but not translated. Okay, so they are not translated, but it is presented for your understanding. Only three are presented here. Okay, the hamartia, the anagnorisis, the peripeteia. We have already discussed hamartia, anagnorisis, and peripeteia, but we would go through it once again. We spoke of it when we were discussing structuralism, but remember it in these terms. Okay, structuralism, and also the one where we were talking about Aristotle initially. So hamartia means a sin or a fault, which in tragic drama is often the product of the fatal character defect, which came to be known as a tragic flaw. So very often we come across these characters in tragedies that seem to face the tragedy with that seem to invite misfortunes through some small flaw in their character. So it would be disproportionately very small, compared to the tragedy they face later on. For instance, consider King Lear, or even Hamlet for that matter, or Macbeth for that matter. All of these characters, in one case, in King Lear's case, it's just some plain stupidity, or rather ego, right? He is egoistic enough to judge his daughter's love for him, right? And based on that, their expression, he divides his kingdom, or rather injudiciously divides his kingdom, gradually consequently inviting trouble over himself. He should have understood, he should have some discernment. He was supposed to have been a king, right? A king is supposed to be discerning in judging people's character. So that was his main flaw, though a small flaw comparatively speaking, that led to his tragic downfall. So his hamartia would be pride, ego, or lack of judgment probably. When you come to Hamlet, of course, his flaw is very, very clear. It is procrastination, as far as I can see it. It's his hesitance, his reluctance to simply take action. You could also say that his hamartia is probably inaction in some sense, because he could have acted out right in the beginning, but he hesitates, he keeps hesitating, he keeps putting it off, he keeps procrastinating, he keeps being uncertain. His uncertainty could be his hamartia. So see, his flaw is very small, comparatively speaking, as in view of all the deaths that occur, all the murders that occur over time. Ophelia dies, his friends die, Polonius die, all the characters. In fact, there are so many deaths because of his small his hesitation, right? And then even Macbeth, for that matter, his hamartia would be probably greed, or even just listening to his wife. Probably he should have used his own understanding a little bit. Of course, he was greedy in his own sense. He did not need his wife to prod him on to take up the crown, to steal the crown, to kill the king and take up his crown. But yes, to some extent, his flaw is that his hamartia could be a little bit his greed, and a little bit his reluctance to listen to his own conscience. Okay, because he does hesitate for a while, but he gives in. Okay, so yes, see, Aristotle identifies these tragic flaws. Okay, I mean, like, not exactly in terms of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare came some quite a few centuries, some 6 centuries later. But as far as the plays Aristotle was concerned, was familiar with, Aristotle shows that every tragic character had some certain flaw which led to his or her tragic downfall. All right. And as far as anagnorisis is concerned, we've already spoken about anagnorisis as well. It simply means recognition or realization. Now see, anagnorisis works in 2 ways. Okay, one would be where the character recognizes his flaws, his faults, and tries to rectify it, but the other is where it is too late to do anything about it. Okay, so anagnorisis could result in 2 consequences, could have 2 consequences. So the anagnorisis means recognition or realization, this being a moment in the narrative when the truth of the situation is recognized by the protagonist. Often it's a moment of self-recognition. So the protagonist realizes what stupidity he has done. He realizes his hamartia. Alright, that's the point of anagnorisis. Now the peripeteia means a turnaround or a reversal of fortune. In classical tragedy, this is usually a fall from high to low estate. Please remember this. This bears remembering. Peripeteia in classical, you need to remember also the case in which this occurs. In classical tragedy, it's a fall from high to low estate, as a hero falls from greatness. In identifying his 3 key moments, Aristotle did what all narratologists do, which is to look at a number of different stories. So Greek state tragedies in this case, asking what elements they have in common. This is similar to the way a physicist would look at different forms of matter, mountains, lakes, volcanoes, etc., and realize that they are all made from the same finite set of chemical elements. In both cases, the skill lies in the trained ability to see the similarities and consistencies which underlie difference. All right. So in all of these cases, in both these cases, it depends on the ability. You are trained to see similarities and consistencies which form, which lie underneath all the differences, the apparent differences in every case. Okay, in each case. All right. So moving on, I'll just remove this, and only then I can move it. So we have one lovely example here. We can see traces. At this point, I request you to take your books, if you have them, on beginning theory, and you would probably be able to let me see if I can do something about these cartoons. So if you have your books with you, please do take it out and look at the cartoons presented here. This is a very small cartoon strip which was possibly which was taken from a packet of brekkies, a British brand for cat food. Okay, so it has a narrative, a cartoon diagram. Okay, a cartoon diagram, a narrative, a complete story, a very short complete story. So in this case, you will be able to see all three elements centered on the protagonist, the hero or heroine of the drama. So these three elements, Peter Barry divides them among the key figures in the story, because he believes that in using literary theory, we don't have to follow the maker's instructions slavishly, as and partly in anticipation of the methods of Vladimir Prop, the next figure he will consider. Okay, so the hamartia or fault is a cat's leaving dirty paw prints. So first of all, let me just tell you the story. It's a story of Bob. Okay, Bob here. So first off, the cat. There is this protagonist. The cat is probably the protagonist here, but the lady here, she is expecting her aunt for dinner. Okay, but the cat has just walked all over the fresh tablecloth, and his left dirty paw prints over it. Okay, paw prints as in his paws, and it is made dirty. Now the auntie is coming to tea, and the woman is upset about how there are dirty paw prints all over it, and she's just yelling at Bob the cat, telling him that now she'll have to change the table cover. Now she has changed the tablecloth. The aunt has come. They are having their tea, and later the aunt says, "Oh, it's the tablecloth I gave you. How nice, right?" See. And she is like happy once again, because the cat is restored to the former position of being a beloved pet once again. So initially the cat is a beloved pet. The cat has a fatal flaw. The flaw is that he or she, it's a Bob, right? So he walked all over the fresh tablecloth and left dirty paw prints, so he's left it unclean. The cat is the lady, the owner of the cat, is upset with the cat. So the cat realizes his mistake. No, not really realizes here. That's not the point of anagnorisis. Now the anagnorisis occurs when the lady, the owner of the cat, she realizes her mistake. She realizes that somehow the cat has made help her make a favorable impression on her aunt, because the cat dirtied the table cover. She used the table cover used by gifted by the aunt, therefore winning her over. So that is the point of anagnorisis here, and the cat is restored to the previous position of being a favorable pet, a favored pet. So that would be the point of peripeteia. Okay, hamartia as in cat's flaw, anagnorisis where the owner of the cat realizes that the cat has indirectly helped her impress her aunt, and peripeteia would be the point where the cat itself is restored to its former favored position. So I guess we've gone long enough, and I'll cut it short. We'll continue in the next class, and we'll discuss it a little more at length. Okay, this is all for now. Thank you so much. Stay safe, be happy. Assalamu alaikum.